On a cold winter morning in the year 800, the fate of Europe changed forever. Inside the ancient walls of St. Peter's Basilica, a towering warrior knelt before the Pope. He expected prayer, he expected ritual, but he did not expect a crown. As the crowd held its breath, Pope Leo III stepped forward and placed a golden crown upon his head. The people erupted in thunderous applause. In that moment, a king became something far greater. He became Emperor of the Romans. But here is the mystery. The man who would shape Europe's destiny claimed he had no idea this would happen. Did he truly not know? Or was this the greatest political performance of the Middle Ages? His name was Charlemagne, a warrior king, a ruthless conqueror, a man who could barely write his own name, yet would ignite a cultural revolution. He would unite lands stretching from the Pyrenees to the Danube, forging what many call Europe's first empire. But unity did not come peacefully. It came with fire, steel, and rivers of blood. Entire kingdoms fell before him. Pagan tribes were crushed. Even the mighty Lombards bowed to his sword. And yet, this story is not only about conquest. It is about ambition, faith, betrayal, and the birth of an idea called Europe. Because when Charlemagne rose, the old Roman world had long been buried. No one believed an empire could rise again. No one expected this. How did a Frankish warlord from the edge of civilization rebuild the dream of Rome? How did he survive endless wars, rebellions, and political intrigue? And why does his shadow still stretch across Europe today? To understand the crown placed upon his head that winter day, we must travel back to a fractured Europe, a land of rival kings, burning villages, and fading Roman glory. Because before Charlemagne became emperor, he was simply a son fighting for survival in a brutal world. And that world was about to test him in ways no one could imagine. To understand Charlemagne, we must return to a broken Europe. The Western Roman Empire had collapsed 3 centuries earlier. Its roads were crumbling, its cities shrinking, and its glory fading into legend. In its place stood scattered kingdoms, ruled by warlords who fought endlessly for power. Among these rising powers were the Franks. They were fierce, practical, and deeply loyal to their kings. Their realm stretched across much of modern-day France and Western Germany, but even this kingdom was far from stable. At its center stood a powerful dynasty known as the Carolingians. Charlemagne's grandfather, Charles Martel, had earned fame by halting an Islamic army at the Battle of Tours in 732. His victory saved Frankish lands from invasion and made his family legendary. Strength and survival became their inheritance. Charlemagne's father, Pepin the Short, took an even bolder step. He removed the last weak Merovingian king and claimed the throne for himself. But he did not act alone. He secured the blessing of the Pope, forging a powerful alliance between the Frankish crown and the Church. This alliance would change history. When Pepin died in 768, his kingdom did not pass to one ruler. It was divided between his 2 brothers, Charlemagne and his younger brother, Carloman. At first, they ruled side by side. But peace between brothers in medieval Europe rarely lasted. Tension simmered beneath the surface. The court was divided. Nobles whispered. Each brother built his own circle of power. Europe watched and waited for conflict. But fate intervened. In 771, Carloman died suddenly under mysterious circumstances. Some suspected illness. Others suspected darker forces. No one could prove anything. What mattered was this: Charlemagne now stood alone as king of the Franks. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and imposing. Chroniclers described him as energetic and commanding, with sharp eyes and a booming voice. He loved hunting, swimming, and riding into battle. Yet he also valued learning and surrounded himself with scholars. But do not mistake him for a gentle ruler. The world he inherited was ruthless. To the south, the Lombards threatened Rome. To the east, pagan Saxon tribes raided Frankish lands. To the southwest, Muslim forces controlled much of Spain. Enemies surrounded him. And then came a desperate plea from Rome itself. The Pope, under attack from rival factions, turned to the Frankish king for protection. It was a familiar alliance, but this time the stakes were far higher. If Charlemagne answered the call, he would not just defend a city, he would step into the heart of Roman legacy. He chose to march, but that decision would pull him into decades of relentless war. It would harden him into a conqueror and reshape the map of Europe. And once he began expanding his kingdom, he would not stop.
Charlemagne's first great test came from the south. The Lombards, longtime rivals of the papacy, had tightened their grip on northern Italy. Their king, Desiderius, believed the young Frankish ruler could be manipulated. He was wrong. In 773, Charlemagne led his army across the frozen Alps. The journey was brutal and dangerous. Snow blinded the soldiers, and narrow mountain passes threatened disaster. But retreat was not an option. When they reached Lombard territory, the real storm began. The Frankish army advanced steadily, forcing Desiderius back into his stronghold at Pavia. The siege lasted for months. Hunger and despair crept through the city walls. Then, in 774, Pavia fell. Desiderius was captured, and Charlemagne did something unexpected. Instead of installing a puppet ruler, he declared himself king of the Lombards. He now ruled both the Franks and northern Italy. But this was only the beginning. To the east, the Saxons watched with fury. They were fierce pagan tribes who resisted Frankish rule and Christian conversion. For them, Charlemagne was not a king. He was an invader threatening their gods and way of life. What followed was one of the longest and bloodiest campaigns of the Middle Ages. The Saxon Wars lasted more than 30 years. Villages burned, churches were destroyed. Frankish garrisons were ambushed in forests thick with mist. Every time Charlemagne thought the rebellion was crushed, it flared again. At the center of Saxon resistance stood a defiant leader named Witikind. He became a symbol of freedom for his people. His raids were swift and brutal, striking at the heart of Frankish territory. Charlemagne responded with terrifying force. In 782, after a Saxon uprising killed thousands of Frankish soldiers, Charlemagne made a decision that still echoes through history. At Verdun, he ordered the execution of 4,500 Saxon prisoners in a single day. It was a message written in blood. But that's not the worst. He issued harsh laws demanding conversion to Christianity under penalty of death. Refusal meant execution. Pagan rituals were outlawed. Entire communities were uprooted and relocated. Was this faith or fear? To the southwest, another frontier beckoned. Muslim forces under the Umayyad rulers controlled much of the Iberian Peninsula. In 778, Charlemagne launched a campaign into Spain, hoping to expand his influence further. At first, success seemed certain, but then came disaster. As his army retreated through the Pyrenees, Basque warriors ambushed the rear guard at the Battle of Roncesvalles Pass. The narrow mountain trail became a killing ground. Among the fallen was a noble knight named Roland. His death would inspire legends for centuries. Charlemagne faced enemies on every side: Saxons in the forests, Avars on the eastern plains, Muslim forces in Spain. Internal revolts simmered beneath the surface. Yet with each conflict, his power grew stronger. He built fortified towns, he reorganized his armies, he appointed loyal counts to rule conquered lands. Slowly, methodically, he transformed chaos into order. But ruling through conquest comes at a price. Behind the victories lay exhaustion, resentment, and fragile alliances. The larger his empire became, the harder it was to control. And somewhere in Rome, the Pope was watching carefully. Because soon, politics, not war, would place Charlemagne at the center of a far greater drama. By the late 790s, Charlemagne stood at the height of his power. The Saxons were finally subdued. The Avars had been crushed in their ring-shaped fortresses along the Danube. Treasure poured into his capital at Aachen, glittering proof of victory. But power creates enemies in silence. In Rome, chaos erupted. On a spring day in 799, Pope Leo III was attacked in the streets by rival Roman nobles. They dragged him from his horse, beat him, and attempted to blind and silence him. The message was clear. Rome no longer respected its own pope. Barely alive, Leo escaped and fled north. He crossed mountains and valleys to seek protection from one man, the warrior king of the Franks. When Leo arrived at Charlemagne's court in Paderborn, it was more than a plea for help. It was an opportunity wrapped in desperation. If Charlemagne defended the pope, he would strengthen the sacred bond between throne and altar, but he would also step into dangerous Roman politics. He chose to intervene. In 800, Charlemagne traveled to Rome with his army. The city was tense and divided. Accusations swirled around the pope, and rumors filled the streets. Some claimed Leo was corrupt. Others insisted he was the victim of a conspiracy. Charlemagne faced a delicate choice. Would he remove the pope and assert dominance, or would he restore him and appear a humble protector? He restored him. Then came Christmas Day. Inside St. Peter's Basilica, candles flickered against ancient stone. The air was thick with incense and expectation. Charlemagne knelt in prayer, unaware, so he later claimed, of what was about to happen. Suddenly, Leo stepped forward and placed a golden crown upon his head. The crowd erupted with shouts of, "Emperor of the Romans." In that instant, a title lost since the fall of Rome was reborn. But here lies the mystery. Did Charlemagne truly not expect the crown? Some historians believe he knew and carefully staged the moment. Others argue he was caught off guard, uneasy with a title that suggested the Pope had the power to create emperors. If the Pope could crown an emperor, could he also remove one? The coronation changed everything. In Constantinople, the rulers of the Eastern Roman Empire were outraged. They already considered themselves the true Roman emperors. Now, a Frankish king in the West claimed the same legacy. Two empires now stood where one once ruled. Charlemagne had achieved unimaginable glory, yet he had also stepped into a storm of political tension that would shape Europe for centuries. The question was no longer whether he could conquer kingdoms. The question was whether he could hold together an empire born in ambition, faith, and uncertainty. As emperor, Charlemagne understood that conquest alone was not enough. An empire built only on fear would eventually collapse. He needed structure, law, and unity beyond the battlefield. From his capital in Aachen, he began reshaping his vast realm. Messengers, known as missi dominici, traveled across provinces to inspect local rulers. Counts who abused power were removed without mercy. Justice, at least in theory, flowed from the emperor himself. But administration was only part of his vision. Charlemagne believed faith could unify what war had divided. Churches and monasteries rose across the countryside. Bishops became royal advisors. Christianity was not simply encouraged, it became the glue of imperial identity. Yet unity through faith came with pressure. Forced conversions among the Saxons left scars that would never fully heal. Some obeyed outwardly while resenting inwardly. The empire looked stable, but beneath the surface, tensions lingered. Then came something few expected from a warrior king. Charlemagne sparked what historians call the Carolingian Renaissance. He invited scholars from across Europe to his court, including the English monk Alcuin of York. Schools were established near cathedrals and monasteries. Ancient Latin texts were copied and preserved, saving classical knowledge from disappearing into darkness. The emperor himself struggled to write, yet he valued learning deeply. Chroniclers describe him practicing letters late at night, tablets hidden beneath his pillow. He knew that power without wisdom was fragile. But even the greatest rulers cannot escape time. In his later years, sorrow touched his household. Several of his children died before him. Trusted advisors passed away. The empire he built began to feel heavy, difficult to manage across vast distances. When Charlemagne died in 814, he was buried in Aachen. His son, Louis the Pious, inherited the crown. But Louis lacked his father's commanding presence. Rivalries grew among Charlemagne's grandsons. Within a generation, the empire fractured. In 843, the Treaty of Verdun divided the realm into three parts. The unity Charlemagne had fought for was gone. West Francia would evolve into France. East Francia would become Germany. The Middle Kingdom would dissolve into contested territories. But that is not the full story. Even though the political structure shattered, the idea survived. The concept of a united Europe under imperial authority endured for centuries. Later rulers would call themselves Holy Roman Emperors, tracing legitimacy back to that Christmas day in 800. So was Charlemagne's empire a failure? Not exactly. He did not create a permanent political union, but he reshaped the map, strengthened royal authority, revived learning, and defined the partnership between church and state. His reign marked the turning point between the chaotic early Middle Ages and a more structured European world. And that legacy would echo far beyond his lifetime. More than 12 centuries have passed since the death of Charlemagne. His empire fractured, his bloodline faded, the banners of his armies turned to dust, and yet his shadow still stretches across Europe. France and Germany, two nations that would later clash in devastating wars, both trace their origins to his realm. The idea of a united Europe, bound by shared culture and faith, can be traced back to his vision. Even today, leaders gather in Aachen to award the Charlemagne Prize to those who promote European unity. But history is rarely simple. He was a builder of schools and a preserver of knowledge. He was also a conqueror who ruled through fear. He defended the church, yet used faith as a weapon. He crowned himself heir to Rome, yet ruled a world far removed from its ancient glory. So how should we remember him? As the father of Europe? As a ruthless warlord? Or something more complex? A man shaped by a brutal age who dared to imagine something larger than his lifetime. On that Christmas morning in the year 800, when the crown touched his head inside St. Peter's Basilica, Europe's future shifted. An old empire was reborn in a new form. The consequences would ripple through centuries of kings, crusades, revolutions, and unions. And perhaps that is his greatest achievement. Not the land he conquered, not the enemies he crushed, but the idea he revived, that a fractured continent could be united under a shared identity. The question is, was it destiny or ambition? If you enjoyed this journey through history, don't forget to subscribe to History Hub for more cinematic stories,
because the past is never truly gone. It is waiting just beneath the surface, ready to rise again.